Okay, so after much technical difficulties, I am here to record yet another version of this video. House of the Dragon, Episode 8. It's called The Lord of the Tides, and I thought this was a phenomenal episode. I think if there's only one thing I could list as missing from House of the Dragon at this point, it would be a sense of humor. Everything else is phenomenal. Comic relief would go a long ways to sort of making this a perfect show. It has all the grandeur of a Shakespearean drama, right? I mean, I'm getting very strong King Lear vibes from House of the Dragon, especially in this latest episode, which focuses so much on Viserys and his desire to see his family unite and set aside their petty grievances, but finds himself at the center of all of this politicking, scheming, and rivalry. Paddy Considine does a phenomenal job as King Viserys I. It's a brilliant performance. Every scene, the throne room scene where he comes in unexpectedly, the banquet scene when he really pleads with his family, and not as their king, but as their grandsire and their husband, and it's so moving, each of these moments. When Daemon puts the crown that Viserys drops on his head, that whole moment was totally improvised. And then the final scene where Viserys is laying in his deathbed and mistakes Alicent for his daughter Rhaenyra and talks about the Aegon dream of the Song of Ice and Fire and the prince that was promised, and he mentions Aegon, and she mistakes that for him saying he wants their son Aegon to sit on the Iron Throne. So even though it looked like during the banquet scene we were going to get some reconciliation and maybe Alicent was finally just accepting that Rhaenyra was going to be queen, at this last moment, thanks to both his delirium and this prophecy that there's this miscommunication about, it looks like, things are about to hit, shit's about to hit the fan. And I apologize, I have been really sick the last couple of days, so I'm a little gunky, little chest congestion, head congestion, brain fog brain. So this whole episode had to do with the succession of Driftmark, right? The Driftwood Throne and House Velaryon. Lord Corlys has been wounded grievously, and no one knows if he's going to survive or not. And so his younger brother Vaemond takes it upon himself to petition the crown to give him Driftmark instead of Rhaenyra's son Lucerys, or Luke, basically calling into question his actual bloodline. So this is a big deal. Obviously, it's a win for the Hightowers, who are currently governing the whole Seven Kingdoms, because Viserys is bedridden with his horrible sickness and missing an eye and all this stuff. And it would be a huge loss for Rhaenyra and her family, because it would lend credence to the claims that her children are illegitimate. I wanted to point out one thing about how they've actually used racial diversity in the show to great effect. By making the Velaryons black, they make it visually striking when her children not only don't have the white hair, but don't have darker skin. So without ever, having to really spell it out, they visually tell this story of Rhaenyra's, infidelity and her having bastard children, just because it's so obvious, And this is actually a pretty clever way to integrate some diversity into the storyline that actually matters. I've heard people say it's token diversity, but it's really not. It has a direct impact on the story, and takes something that would be difficult to portray, much more difficult to portray on screen from a book, and does so in a really effective way. And they could have done this, they could have done this if House Velaryon was olive-skinned with dark hair instead of black. Some sort of visual difference in what Laenor and Harwin Strong look like, so that the children are obviously not Laenor's. I think it's fine that they use black actors and made House Velaryon black, especially because they're from Old Valyria, and there's that was an empire that spanned oceans. So anyways, Um, when Viserys shows up at the throne room, this undermines Vaemond and his wife and his hand, who were all going to throw Rhaenyra and Luke under the bus, but he instead embraces his grandson as, it reaffirms him as heir, and also is excited to hear that Rhaenys and Rhaenyra have discussed betrothing Jace to Baela and Luke to Rhaena, and uniting those houses and those families, so that eventually Jace and Baela will be king and queen of Westeros, Luke and Rhaena will be Lord and Lady of Driftmark. All really good for everyone in Rhaenyra and Daemon's camp. Not so great for Alicent and her children, who are kind of being left in the wind. So you can kind of understand why, they're a little defensive, while they're a little worried. They just happen to be kind of scummy, overly ambitious, and kind of ruthless people. So, Aegon and Aemond are not very likable. Aegon is kind of a little shit, honestly. Especially compared to, like, Jace, who's clearly, trying to study and learn to become a good leader eventually and become king eventually. Aemond is fascinating. I think the casting of Ewan Mitchell as Aemond is really spot on. It's very strange because he plays Osferth in The Last Kingdom, and he's the bastard son of Alfred the Great, who has been, has grown up as a monk, and he's a very sweet guy, friend and ally to Uhtred, son of Uhtred, son of Uhtred, son of Uhtred of Bebbanburg. And he's like the opposite character in this. He's sinister and creepy and intimidating and just does it so freaking well. So I love to see him in this role. He has a great scene at the banquet where he toasts to Jace and Luke and Joffrey, his three nephews, who are very brave and very wise and very strong, and he emphasizes strong, clearly goading them into anger because he's mentioning Harwin Strong's name, and that's their father, their actual real father, which everybody knows, but no one's allowed to actually say out loud. So this is a clear goading of them, and it was after the king left the banquet that he does this. It's very calculated. And he's just great in this scene. And I also love to see that the Daemon step in, and this sort of tension and interesting rivalry between Daemon and his nephew Aemond, who are very similar in some ways, and both kind of inscrutable and intimidating and confident, and clearly violent. So, great episode. Definitely would love to see them insert some comic relief in this show. Just because I think it can help us relate to the characters. But at this point, I am really loving how well drawn each character is, how these complex rivalries are festering and growing, how dynamic this world is, and how tightly focused this story is on the Targaryens and Valerians and Hightowers, and just the succession drama of the Seven Kingdoms and House Targaryen, House of the Dragon. It's really interesting to watch this alongside watching Rings of Power. Rings of Power is like trope after trope after trope, Hollywood cliche after Hollywood cliche, terrible lines, PowerPoints, transitions, and just a non-stop sort of, it's kind of funny. Honestly, it's kind of fun to watch just because of how bad it is. Whereas this show is Shakespearean, complex, brooding, lushly filmed, immersive in both its story and in its place and its sense of, it's different than we're used to with Game of Thrones because of all the time jumps, and I think it's a little harder to relate to the characters just because they're a little more complicated. But I'm honestly finding it to be an even more mature and grown-up show than Game of Thrones was, and just I think I think a lot of that is the writing, the acting. God, and again, Paddy Considine just knocked it out of the park tonight, or in the most recent episode. So, anyways, let me know what you think of House of the Dragon so far. Shout out in the comments. If you'd like, you can like and subscribe. We're almost to 10,000 subs here on this little channel of mine, and I really appreciate it. Peace.